You're listening to the Paranormal UK Radio Network. Hello? Is that the famous astronomer, Sir Patrick Moore?
It is, very much so.
Any news on the space front?
Quite so. Elon Musk has just designed and developed 5 gigantic, state-of-the-art rocket ships. All members of Parliament, along with the American Senate, have first-class tickets aboard them, you see. They're told they're going to the moon.
Told? Where exactly are they going, Sir Patrick?
The new anomaly discovered recently astronomically. A huge black hole.
Welcome to Twin Souls. Twin Souls is brought to you in association with the Paranormal UK Radio Network. Your hosts, Philip and Ronald Kinsella. Now today we have an amazing guest who we've had on before, who is none other than Terry Lovelace. Now Terry Lovelace has written 2 best-selling books, and we'll get to that in a moment. His first book, Incident at Devil's Den, was a smash hit with Amazon. And Terry has now gone on to write Devil's Den, The Reckoning, his new book. And today, which is the 11th of the 2nd, 2021, we found out and were informed by Terry himself that his book is, again, new book, is a bestseller. Congratulations to you, Terry.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that kind introduction, and thanks for mentioning that.
That's okay. Now, most of the listeners may not know too much about a lot of what you're involved in, but with regards to your incident, your first book, Incident at Devil's Den, do you want to give your listeners a little brief overview of what happened there, Terry?
Sure, I can do that quickly. Briefly, what happened was I was, and by way of biography, I graduated from high school in 1973 and enlisted in the United States Air Force, where I served on active duty for 6 years. In 1977, while on active duty, the guy that I worked with, a good friend of mine, we decided to take a camping trip to Devil's Den State Park, which is in the northwest corner of Arkansas. We were both stationed at Whiteman Air Force Base, which back then was a SAC base, a nuclear base. And we drove 6.5 hours south and we went camping. We went on a camping trip. Neither one of us, curiously, had ever been camping before. I was 22 at the time. My friend was 23. And it was a strange adventure. I went for the purpose of photographing wildlife, and my friend was just obsessed with viewing the night sky, and that was the purpose of that's why he wanted to go. He had heard that there was an elevated plateau somewhere inside the park, and we found that. We had to trespass. It's actually carved out of the park. It's on federal land, and there's a almost triangular shaped plateau that's level with the treetops. That just made an excellent place to camp. And we had it all to ourselves, of course. And we didn't worry about trespassing. We thought, well, what's the worst that can happen? The park rangers will come and throw us out, So we set up our camp, and we did all the fun stuff you do when you go camping. And we're really having a good time. At around 9 o'clock p.m., we were laid back on air mattresses with a campfire. And I noticed, and this sounds cliche, I know, but I swear that it is true, that the sounds of the forest, the crickets, the tree frogs, all those insects and things that make noise, fell silent. And it was as silent as being in a sound booth. We even lost the breeze that we had. And it kind of unnerved me. But my friend was just fine. He said, yeah, no worries. We've been laughing and cutting up, and, don't worry about the bugs. They'll come back. But I did worry about it a little bit. And he was fixated on something on the western horizon. And I'm about to ask him, hey, what are you looking at? And he asked me, Terry, were those lights there before? And I don't recall any lights. We were in a remote area, and his torso was in the way. I had to stand up and take a step back. And on the western horizon, there was a tight cluster of 3 little stars right on the horizon. And we're watching them, and they rotate. They rotated like they were on an axis and aligned themselves with the base of the triangle parallel with the horizon. And then they went up. And as soon as they started to go up, I felt this weird calm sensation wash over me. And it affected my friend, too. And it speaks to the influence that these things can have on us. Because I went from being very nervous and very uncomfortable to being, I was in a strange place. I was very relaxed and almost mildly disinterested. Disassociated would be a good word. More like a observer than a participant. And we just watched this thing play out. And it reached the ceiling at these 3 lights, and then it began a glide, a descent, and it was obviously headed right in our direction. And we could see it was one solid object and not 3 operating in unison. And it glided in to about 3,000 feet and parked directly over our camp. And we both sat there, and it shined some crazy lights down on our campsite. And then we transitioned, both of us, from being mildly sedated to being suddenly sleepy. And I was so sleepy. Have you ever been so tired that all you want to do, not tired, but sleepy? Have you ever been in that state where all you want to do is find a place to lay your head and go to sleep?
Oh, yes. Yeah, definitely.
That's where we were at. And with this thing 3,000 feet over our heads, we just went to the tent, climbed in, and immediately we were out and we were asleep. And we were abducted while we were sleeping. And we were gone, we figure, between 4 and 5 hours.
Good Lord. It's really interesting, Terry, because I know that this is all outlined in your first book, Incident at Devil's Den. And I have to say that, we have had you on radio before, and you've been on over 100 podcasts. So a lot of people are very interested in the experiences that you've been through, but also that this new book of yours, Devil's Den, The Reckoning. Before we get into that, this wasn't the first time that you'd had an experience of this kind. In fact, this seems to have stemmed back into your childhood, which, a lot of people who have these so-called UFO experiences and encounters find themselves having a history of them. And you certainly were, made very much aware of that through your first book. And that's evident, especially, not backtracking too much here, but the monkey men as well. I mean, that scared the heck out of me when I read that part of your experience as a kid.
I published that March 10th of 2018, and I put an email address in the epilogue and said, look, I'm not a doctor or a therapist, but if you have a story similar to mine that you'd like to share, I'd be glad to talk to you about it. And as of today, I have 1,563 emails from folks. And that was kind of the basis for the second book, because I found out that the experiences that I've had are not that unique. I had so many people write to me and say, I read your book and it really triggered memories that I hadn't thought about in a long time. And people have seen, one woman actually called them the monkey men when in her childhood, saw the same thing. But people have seen clowns and owls, raccoons, balls of light, little gray men, just all variety of things. And, I think that these things talking about their influence, can appear to a child in a way that the child will see as most benign and least threatening. And
yes, but you did see the Greys. This was chilling, and I'll never forget when you told us, and I actually read it. When I asked you about this, Terry, regarding your first book, was the most chilling aspect when you were aboard this vessel. And you did say to me that one of them, the tall grey, when it turned to look at you, it was like it was the master and you were the dog. I'll never forget that, what you said. And it must have been so horrifying for you. But I have to say how admirable it is for you to come out with this. And it's taken a long time. I mean, you've given it a lot of thought, haven't you? And you've had the courage to come forward with this, to tell others. And I think it's wonderful. But of course, as I said, you have seen the Greys themselves, haven't you?
I have. I saw them that night in 1977. When they put us back, when they were finished with us, we were back in the tent, and we could tell that we had been redressed. My boots were unlaced, my socks were on sideways. We knew something dreadful had happened to us. But when I peeked out the tent flap into the meadow where we were, I saw what I first took to be maybe a dozen or 15 children, and they were all paired up in twos and threes, and just wandering around this open grassy meadow. And I asked my friend, man, what are these kids doing out here in the middle of the night, in the middle of nowhere? And my friend said, Terry, don't you remember? They took us and they hurt us. Look again. Those ain't no little kids, Terry. They're not human beings. And that's what snapped me out of that sedated feeling. And in that instant, I was absolutely terrified. But yeah, we saw them.
Yeah, also the other thing as well that, with your new book, The Reckoning, Devil's Den, The Reckoning, what I found really intriguing was the fact that you had, opened up to these other cases of people's experiences. And I thought, what a wonderful way of bringing people forward and sharing their stories and their experiences. One of the things I found equally moving also was Betty's warning for humanity. And but before I go into that, there is a burning question I have to ask you, Terry, because we're all very busy and I haven't had a chance to really ask you. I remember that afterwards, and when you were planning to write your first book, Incident at Devil's Den, you had a meeting in your home when you'd made sure that everything was locked, and you found yourself in the living room and face to face with what you thought at first was a tiny Asian lady wearing sunglasses and a wig, and that she was dead against you revealing any information about this book that you were planning to write, because the being said to you that if you release this information, we're going to remove, because you did have physical implants that you've recorded in both of your books, and also has been confirmed by the medical establishment. Have you had any more feelings or connections with regards to this type of being that had communicated with you, Terry?
I did. I had an incident that happened in this room in my study on November 19th of 2020, just a few weeks ago.
Oh.
And I I was awake. I was sitting here working on my computer, and I was aware that I wasn't alone in the room. I could sense that something. I turned expecting to see my cat, and instead I immediately recognized her as Betty, or as I called her, Sue. They're one and the same entity. I called her Sue when I was a little kid. It's the same entity. And she was seated in a chair in my study, with her legs crossed in a non-threatening posture. And I felt that calm. I knew that she wasn't there to be aggressive, that I had nothing to fear from her. And she communicates telepathically. Mm-hmm. And my very first thought was, it's nice to see you again. I can't explain it, but I feel an odd affection for her. the same telepathic type conversation that I recall that we had when I was a child. The same telepathic conversation when I had seen her 2 years earlier. 2017. So that's 4 years now. When she visited me in my home in October 2017. And she looked the same. She looked the same as she did in my childhood. So she doesn't appear to age. And she spoke to me, and I asked her, "Why are you here?" We exchanged initial pleasantries, and she said, "I have something important to tell you." And she said, on February 1st, 2021, she didn't say the 2021, it was inferred. On February 1st, the world will change. And on February 2nd, it will be a new world. I didn't know how to take that. And I took it initially as being good news. And I thought, maybe she's telling me that some type of disclosure, some type of major announcement or major world event will happen. Well, I mean, a major world event did happen, and it was the outbreak of COVID, of course. The next morning, this happened in my study at 3:30. When I saw her in the chair, I reached over to my keyboard and I tapped 333. I was in a Word document because I wanted to do something physical to document that this was an actual event, not a dream.
Yeah.
And it was at 3:33, and it was a short conversation. But the next morning when I woke up, I felt deeply saddened, and I knew that whatever was coming was not a good thing. It wasn't anything by way of disclosure. And I felt, in late December, I felt a panic that I don't know where it comes from, or where it came from. Again, I think it speaks to the influence these things had on us and have over us. And I bought water and food and extra firewood and built my stockade fence in the backyard. And my wife was concerned, are you going crazy? Why are you spending all this money on this stuff? And I said, well, I just think it's good to be prepared in case something happens. And curiously, I don't know if it was insight. I don't know if it was a gift. But I'm grateful to Betty in that on January 31st, I sold some stock that I had, Coca-Cola, General Motors, things like that. And I bought, believe it or not, Moderna, Gilead, Abbott Labs, and one more. I bought 4 pharmaceutical stocks. And it turned out to be a very good investment for me. And January 31st, it wasn't, the scope of the thing really didn't hit home until, maybe the third week in February. I think people started to get a clue that this was really something serious. Some people take serious. Some people don't take it serious at all. No. I take it very seriously myself.
Yeah, I think here, Terry, the way I see this is that these beings have been in your life the way I see it since you were born. So the episode that you had with regards to the huge triangular craft at Devil's Den, have you come any nearer in establishing what the aliens were doing, or the whole meaning of taking you and your friend at that particular point in that time? Because we know afterwards that, the ruckus that you had to go through with the military establishment. But have you had any more understanding of why that initial very dark period, that episode?
Well, I was just going to say, I was going to add that it just struck me when I read the book, the first one as well, is that it just struck me that Toby and Terry were meant to go there. It's as if you were just compelled to go there. I mean, it's as if you didn't know why. It was it's like a riddle, just as you said about Betty. It's always like a riddle, isn't it? They'll give you, when she said to you, it's quite interesting, Terry, when she said to you about February, but what she said, it depends what context you look at it. You couldn't decide what context that would come under. So it's always like a riddle, isn't it? But I feel that you were driven to go there unconsciously, unknowingly. You just were meant to go to Devil's Den. And I don't think this is finished yet with you, Terry. I think there's a lot more to come.
I think you're right. I think I'm involved in something in some way. And there are two questions here that need to be answered. And Philip, your question was...
yeah, it was very much linked to, have you come to any form of understanding?
Yeah, how have I reconciled process, this 1977 event? And since we've last talked, I've had a bit of a change in feeling, and I feel a lot less anger and a lot less resentment toward the entities that took us. I don't think that it was intentionally a torture session. I think that they were doing something research, medical-wise. It has more of a clinical feel to it, and I don't have the resentment against them that I used to have, and that's a good place to be. And that may be, part of the benefit of talking about it and writing about it. But I get this feeling that if I could sit down with one of these entities that was on that ship, that we could sit down and enjoy a beer, a cup of coffee, and they would say, "Hey, just doing my job, man." It would be that kind of, that kind of exchange.
Yeah. And, the other thing, Terry, is that what's interesting, a lot of people, when they've been through what we call an abduction, is that they find that they become more empathic, more psychic, more creative, more open. And also the interesting part to your story was very much centered around, the military knowing about or being able to track the craft at Devil's Den when you and your friend had your experience. I mean, have you got any theories about how they knew or how they became aware of your experience that you had? I mean, I know that, that you became very ill and your friend, and you were under medical supervision at the military base, and this is where a lot of this came out. But, the photographs that you hadn't took, which the military thought that you had, I mean, this tells us categorically that, the military must know a lot more than what we know. What's your thoughts on that?
You know what? Yeah, and I can tie Ronnie's question into that too. And, and I agree that, Ronnie, I think you're spot on that these things aren't half done with me yet. And, I'm in a place where I guess that's okay. And how did the Air Force know? Because those two OSI agents, from, USAF Security Police from the Office of Special Investigation, the plainclothes guys, interrogated me while I was in the hospital bed. 48 hours after we left Devil's Den. And he, interrogated me, wanted to know what we were doing down there and why we left all our stuff down there, because we just got out of there. We left our tent, we left his cooler, his backpack, which had his address in it, which is, I think, is how they may have found us. But I think they may have known. This whole trip was just bizarre in that it really felt like we were keeping an appointment. Someone, a guy who read my book, who's here in Texas, who was a cartographer. That's what he did. He spent a lifetime as a cartographer for the U.S. government. So he is a map maker by trade. And he viewed the aerial photographs of Devil's Den and the state park, and we were only 2 miles from the campsite, but we were an 8-mile drive from that park campsite because it was winding through thick forest. And we had to make something like 20 right or left turns in the appropriate way to get there. And he laid out the route for me, and to see it with all of the turns possible is just amazing that we got there. I mean, to stumble on this place by trial and error, it could have taken days. We couldn't see the plateau because the top of the plateau was even with the tops of the trees. So it was invisible until we were right up on it. So, but my friend was able to say, make a right here, make a left here, without any problem. And he got us out of there at night. So the reason that the Air Force knew to get back on track, I think the Air Force and ET work in concert. I think they work arm in arm together towards some shared agenda. I'm more confident of that now than I've ever been in my life. I think that's the explanation.
And you've even documented in your new book, The Reckoning. I mean, we were graced with the images of your implants in your first book, Instance at Devil's Den, which was incredible, and the experience that you'd gone through, and the pain also. I mean, and it looks to me like you've gone through a lot of healing, which many people or abductees do go through, and they tend to change their opinions afterwards because I think it opens up something in the psyche. But you've actually also in your new book, The Reckoning, Devil's Den, The Reckoning, you have actual photographs. I think you're one of the only guys that we know that has brought more physical proof to the table, not just with regards to your implants, but it's not that we need the physical proof, but you've got it here. You've actually got images of UFOs and also helicopters following you, wherever you go. And of course, in the back of your new book, you have these wonderful pictures of them, which I'm looking at right now. And this is incredible. I mean, do you sense when they're around you, Terry? Do you have a feeling to know to get the camera out and take a few clicks or whatever?
I do, but I can't explain it. I'll be sitting on the sofa watching television with my wife, and I'll feel a compulsion is the best word for it, to get up and go outside. And I've gone outside and taken a picture of a blank sky, and then when I blow it up on the screen, the one picture that has the disc and the helicopter in it together, that photograph was taken, and the only thing that I saw when I took that photograph was the helicopter, and it was very tiny. And not until I blew it up on a large monitor could I even see that there was a craft just to the top right going out of frame. And that's happened a lot. And it's an odd thing in that we'll be somewhere and I will see something dart across the sky. I'll see something silver in the sky, and I'll point to my wife and I say, "Can you see that? Can you see that?" And she'll say, "I don't see anything." So, I mean, sometimes I can see them, but she can't for whatever reason.
But do you know, Terry, I was just going to add here that when Betty told you that riddle about February, I do personally have a feeling, and I think a lot of people do, that something's going to happen. Now, the good thing about yourself, the wonderful thing is you're bringing this to the foreground, whereas ironically, the government and the military are trying to suppress it, but it's coming out more and more. I mean, we've had, as we know about Tic Tac from the military, the Navy, but I think it's still, I just have this feeling it's being suppressed. They're trying to do everything they can to suppress it, but these things, they're going to have one over them, I think, in the end, because they actually can do what they want. It's ironic. That's why I believe that, the denial was because they were either frightened, the military, that they had no control over them, or they were trying to guard a dark secret. As you said yourself, you're more convinced that they perhaps have working with these things, or they're a little wiser to them. But I don't think even they could grasp their full agenda, because the intelligence that is here amongst us, I wouldn't think they would ever divulge any kind of agenda to anyone, other than, as Betty herself said to you, they give you little teasers. I think this is very interesting, especially what she told you. And of course, I immediately, when she said about February, I immediately thought it was good. But like you suddenly think, when you stated this, that you actually think again and think, what do they actually mean by that?
Yeah. Have you ever heard of a gentleman by the name of Kevin Briggs?
No, I haven't personally.
He's from the UK, lives, but he moved to Florida and became a U.S. citizen some years back. And he unbeknownst to me, I met him at the Consciousness Conference with Whitley Strieber in South Dakota in Pine Ridge in 2019.
Yeah.
And I messaged him on Facebook, and Kevin Briggs got back to me and said, you know that on February 2nd, UFOs are going to appear in New York City over the United Nations building. And I said, no, I did not know that, Kevin. And this was in December of 2020.
Yeah.
So he was, 4 weeks away or 6 weeks away, whatever it was. Kevin claims that he is in contact, and I believe him, with a group of entities that appear to him. What happened, everything that happened with Betty, with Kevin Briggs, with, Whitley Strieber in December stating that February was going to be something is going to happen in February.
Yeah. And
then the military involvement ties in with disclosure by the Israeli former space Haim Eshed. And I have friends in Tel Aviv who tell me that he is, like the Buzz Aldrin, he is a national hero. He ran their space program for 30 years, and in particular, space defense. And then he taught at university for 10. And he came out on December 8th in the Jerusalem Post. It was first announced. He said that the United States and Israel were co-signatories to a treaty with a federation of extraterrestrial, extra-dimensional beings. And they are a collection from different species of ETs, which kind of explains the varied sightings that people have. And that we've been a party to that since 1950, since the early 1950s. And Betty told me that, and I disclosed that in the second book. That was part of her message to me, was that our government, the United States, has been a party to a treaty since Dwight Eisenhower days.
Oh, yes. Yes. I've been reading up about that, Terry, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if there was, which I suspect there probably was, a treaty developed between the president and them. It's what you were talking about, Willie Strieber. A point that has just popped up in my head is I remember them saying to him, the aliens, he said, you have no right to do this. And they said, we have every right, or something to that effect.
Yes.
Which would suggest to me, I thought about it, and it would suggest to me and strengthen the case of President Eisenhower, the treaty he made with these things. Of course, at the time, and as for now, trust is a major factor because, it's like, can these be trusted or can they not? I suppose it just boils down to personal opinion. But it's interesting you were saying that about Israel. Gentleman, the minister, in actually announcing this, because it seems to me it's like one of those, I know it sounds ridiculous, but it's like one of those old-fashioned science fiction films, but truth it does come from fiction, really, because when the people are controlled and they say something and they then wonder why they said it. I mean, we don't know his thoughts about it afterwards, I don't know, but it's like the world over, people are coming out, like Betty said to you, with these things as if subliminal messages, as if preparing us for something bigger, good or bad, we don't know.
Boy, and I couldn't agree with you more. And I know I keep repeating myself, but when I speak of the influence, that subtle influence that they have over us, I think that's greater than we know.
Yes.
Shortly after I published The Reckoning, I got an email from a gentleman, and it was someone within the UFO community. I won't say who, but was very angry, and which it seemed odd to me. And he said, you should retract that statement about Eisenhower and the agreement because that's fallacy. That's false. That Richard Doty, the OSI special agent, came out and debunked all of that. And I told this person, well, I do know who Mr. Doty was, and I do know that he was a source of a lot of misinformation in a lot of regard. But I'm not going to retract the statement that I made that I believe is true, based on you telling me about Richard Doty. That's.
Yeah. He could say the same about Roswell. They could say about everything. You see, this is the point. The anger suggests, why would they be so angry? If it never happened, they wouldn't be so bothered. So it's a telltale sign, I think. It's like Roswell. The military first then announced that they had in their possession a flying disc, and then they retracted it because they were aware of the implications. So as we said before, Terry, there's no smoke without fire. I personally, and Philip as well, have always believed that President Eisenhower had a meeting with these things. He had a meeting with them, and perhaps more than once, as we've just found out, but it would not surprise us at all. And when people send things like that, they're obviously hepped up about something. They want to try and bury it. And do you know what? I think it's wonderful. You stick with your principles, Terry. You stick with your beliefs, because I absolutely do believe that the great president himself did have a meeting with these extraterrestrials.
I believe that with all my heart. And I think that this person was trying to dissuade me because, perhaps he is, on the other side. I mean, perhaps he's, working for an agency. Yeah.
Yeah. One of the interesting things I find going back to, the way that things happen, and sometimes you're left to, think about it and say, well, did that happen? I'll give you an incident that happened with me. And, this is your show, but I will tell you that when I had problems with my right ear, and this was all going back to 1989, the winter when I had a UFO abduction. And, not so long ago, I'd gone back to the doctors on the third occasion, and I remembered the doctor getting another doctor to have a look in and saying, it looks like it's got a crystalline structure. It still looks like it's healing. They left it, and the doctor in front of me said, have you been abducted by aliens? And I remember getting up from the chair and going back to my car, far worse than I'd gone into the doctor's. So this strangeness, this level of high strangeness, you are left to work it out, like you've been through a lot of it, Terry. I mean, in your books, even I'll just quote here from not just the Reckoning, your new book, but you have mentioned this before, that on April the 16th, 2019, 5:23 a.m., you had your iPhone analyzed, which showed that it had actually gone up in the air, which means that you would have gone up in the air because you had this iPhone in your breast pocket because you listened to music. Can you tell the listeners a little bit more about that?
Yes, I can, and I should. Since the days of the Sony Walkman, I sleep at night with a pair of headphones on, and I listen to back in the day, I listened to meditative tapes or music. Today, I listen to meditative tapes, binaural beats, something along those lines. It helps me to sleep, and it eliminates the ambient noises in the house that just freak me out. So I sleep with I have a special case that shields it because I have heart issues. I sleep with this shielded case in the T-shirt pocket that I sleep in, and I sleep with the earbuds in my ears. And that's worked fine for me for many years. And I woke up at 5:55 a.m. on April 16, 2019, out of breath and tachycardic. My pulse was through the roof. I thought I was having some type of heart-related event. And I had my wife call an ambulance, and I went to the hospital. And initially, my blood saturation was 96% instead of 100, which is why I was so out of breath. And my blood pressure was 210 over 110. And my pulse rate, like I say, was 175 or something, just absolutely outrageous. But, within 30 minutes, I got to the hospital and got in bed. And within 30 minutes, my blood pressure, my pulse, my respiration, everything was back to normal. And I've had enough heart issues. I know the drill. It's going to be cardiac enzymes, an EKG, and a chest X-ray. Those are the three things that go with having chest pain and being admitted to the hospital. And I never had chest pain. I just had the shortness of breath. So something weird happened. And later on, I'll move this forward. Later on that evening, they discharged me from the hospital because they found nothing wrong with me. Late in the afternoon, I went home and felt fine. And my wife and I had dinner together. And after dinner, I always go for a walk for about, a mile. And as I'm walking toward the street, I pull up my health app because I want to see how many steps I clock every day. I use this health app daily to keep track of my health. And when I hit it, it said that at 5:23 a.m., I climbed 6 flights of stairs between 5:23 and 5:24. I included a picture of the health app in my book. And if you look at, the vertical axis, the y-axis goes up in increments of 10 feet. 10 feet equals 1 flight of stairs. And normally, if I were to climb 4 flights of stairs, I can't do it in a minute. It takes me a couple of minutes. Yeah. So the x-axis on the bottom that goes from left to right measures time traveling from left to right. So it's passage of time. So I would have maybe a 10-foot readout, a bar showing that I traveled 10 feet. And then, 3 minutes later, show a bar up 20 feet as I hit the second floor, and then 30 feet. So there'd be a stair step type readout. Never in my life have I ever had anything like this. And I took the phone to Apple, and I gave it to a young lady who said she was an electrical engineer, and she would check it out for me. And she did, and verified there's nothing wrong with the app or the phone. And I asked her, I said, well, how is this measured? Because I thought it was a GPS thing or something. She said, actually, no, your iPhone uses barometric pressure to measure height, and which kind of surprised me. And I didn't know that. But she said that your phone was 60 feet over your location at between 5:23 and 5:24 a.m. on that date. And I guess that's anecdotal proof.
So would suggest that you were taken up into the sky.
That's the only explanation that I have.
Yeah.
Someone did email me and said, "Well, I think you attached your phone to a drone and flew it up 60 feet in the air." And
oh my God, the lengths! I promise you,
I'm too inept with technology to know. You have a remote idea how to do that, and I'm not going to take my cell phone and fly up into the air. But
ridiculous. I think you've given more than enough evidence physically to categorically prove that what's happened to you and what is continuously happening to you is very much like what was happening with Whitley Strieber. And one of the things I wanted to ask you, Terry, was that with regards to your association, and I will use that word now, association with these aliens, or if you want to call them greys or whatever people want to term them, your ideas about them, Terry. I mean, obviously that you have, as a very intelligent and articulate guy yourself, obviously, do you believe that there is more to this? What I mean here is that do you think in terms of the soul of consciousness, do you think this is a journey that just stops here on this earth plane, or do you think it continues beyond this sphere of reality?
My God, I'm so glad you asked me that question. And I'll tell you the reason why. In these 1,500 emails that I've received from people all over the world, I've had several people from the near-death experience community contact me. And the first woman said, have you ever given, real thought to the commonalities between survivors of the near-death experiences and survivors of abduction? And I admitted, no, that I hadn't given that any thought. And we engaged in a dialogue, and we talked about it. And she's right. There are a lot of things in common. They're both life-changing events. And I've come to believe that there is a spiritual component to all of this. And of late, I'm thinking that all of it is somehow tied together. I mean, even, Bigfoot and, UFOs and USOs under the sea, and near-death experiences, alien abduction, all of these things that we group together, and with the word that I just can't stand is paranormal, because it's lost all meaning. And it's too vague. It's too broad a term to be descriptive of anything, really. But maybe through all these things, there is a thread of commonality that runs through them all that leads back to a source. I believe that so much that I'm 30,000 words into my next book about it.
Wow. I've always had this awareness, even since 1996. I mean, I brought out a theory with regards to the Greys and matched it with the abduction phenomena. What's interesting is that we can take different, facets towards this. People think that the Greys are robots, they're people from the future, and I'm always open to all forms of speculation. But one of the things that, like you and many other people, go through when you've had an experience of this kind, is it seems to open up the soul or areas of the soul. And I think at that point, I've always argued, as you have, that, we're all trying to squeeze it into the same box and it just won't fit. But again, I agree with you, because the way I've looked at this is the near-death experience and the abduction seem to mirror one another. One's more positive in most cases than the other one. And when someone is removed from their body through an NDE, if they're going through a terminal illness, they're normally cured. The same with an abduction, when they're taking, maybe the astral part or the soul is taken into the Grey's vibrational rate of reality. It becomes matched. And of course, what they do to the body, the etheric body that is the real you, has an effect on the physical, like implants and that type of thing. So I think now what's wonderful is that people and yourself are becoming more aware of a greater reality that goes beyond the nuts and bolts syndrome of pathology. And I think that's wonderful. So, and the other thing I want to ask you is, Terry, I'm so pleased to hear you say that, because a lot of the times when I've spoken to people, they always used to be very scared of talking about the soul or life after death or, aliens and interdimensional realities. But now it seems to be becoming more popular. So you're working on a new book, Terry? I
am. And the name of it is Go Tell the Bees, Death Anthology.
Oh, that sounds really interesting. And, one of the things I will say, though, going back to your new book, which, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, is a bestseller today, which is wonderful news for Terry and all those lovely souls that know him. You've also put a lot of work in this book, and you've also included a lot of other people's experiences. So it's not just about what you've gone through and which you've really analysed and you've brought to the table to show people, look, this is what it is, this is what I have, it's the truth, and that's the way it is. But you've also put a lot of other people's experiences in. Tell us, Terry, what is the one case that you've included in your book that really stands out to you? I mean, I know they all would stand out, and that's not, saying that the others aren't, but what is the one that really stands out to you in that book?
There are two. I don't have time to go into both. But the first story in the book by Olivia, called The Christmas Store, is just an incredible story. And she is a 76-year-old woman who is as sharp cognitively as I am, or sharper. And 76-year-old women don't normally make up fairy tales. And I'm the first person she shared her story with since her husband died in 1983. So, when people do that and tell me that's a giant privilege. I feel very, that I feel moved by that, and I'm very grateful for that. And I'm grateful that she agreed to share her story. But the one that stands out to me is the gentleman from South Africa. We changed his name. I think I call him Byron. He lives outside of Johannesburg in a smaller town that's an agricultural community. His father, it's a family business. They repair automobiles and farm machinery. And this incident happened, I believe, in 2008. I get dates mixed up. 2008, I believe. And he got a call from a customer named Duncan, who said that his tractor broke a a belt, and he needed a belt. And he explained to me, he says, I know Duncan. I knew the machine. And he said, and I took a belt with me, and I hopped in my Land Rover and went out there to his farm. And I liked him because it was his writing was so entertaining, because it was kind of a mix between English and Afrikaans, and maybe a little Dutch. There were some differences of words. We kind of went back and forth, but he said that Duncan was in a tizzy and upset, and he couldn't understand it. And he had broken down at the end of his field, right near a tree line with some heavy shrubbery that separated his property from an adjoining piece of property. And Duncan is dragging him and says, "Come here, you got to see this. You got to see this," and dragging him through this hedge. And they both were carrying sidearms, which I don't know, maybe the custom. But Duncan, the older man with the broken tractor, had pulled out his firearm. And, Byron felt the same need. If you're armed, there must be something. He was thinking there was some kind of people over there posing a threat. And he looked through the brush, and there was a big open field of grass. And there were four vehicles, four bullet-shaped, stainless steel-looking vehicles in a diamond-shaped formation over this grass field. And they were hovering about 4 feet over, and they were all spinning at just an incredible high speed. And Duncan is just scared to death because he thinks that they're spaceships, which obviously they were, but... He says, no, there's no such thing as spaceships. I'll prove it to you. He said, these are boys from Russia or from the United States or someplace. I'll just walk up and say hi to them and let them know we're friends. And he walks up to this spinning vehicle, fully expecting it to be manned by a human being. And I didn't get I wasn't able to talk to him by phone, but in his writing, he hailed it with H-E-I-T-A, Hayata. Maybe a greeting in Afrikaans, I'm not sure. So he holds his hand up and yells, Hayata, and the thing stops rotating, slowly stops rotating, and then lowers itself almost to the ground. And an archway opened up in front of him, like a camera lens. And standing there was a tall, 6 foot tall, humanoid-looking entity wearing what he called a tinfoil suit, a silver suit, with gloves and with silver footwear, nothing on his head. And he said that the gentleman appeared to be, quote, of the Mongoloid race, that he had no hair, but his features were absolutely human. And he said that it was interesting. He used the word thought transference. He said that this entity spoke to him via thought transference instead of telepathy. And he said that he heard him in his head, and he said, we apologize for the trespass. And he had the thought, well, why are you here? And he had figured out pretty quick that this was not human beings he's dealing with. And the entity told him, we're here to neither help nor to harm. We're here to observe. And we're going to effect some repairs, and we'll be on our way shortly. And he says, and this, I thought this was so funny, he told this alien, and he said, well, I'm very good with mechanical things. If you'd like to, I'd be glad to take a look at whatever you have.
That's quite charming.
I thought so too. And the entity said, would you like to come in and see? And he said, yes, I would. And then the entity holds his hand up and says, but your friend's not well, and your friend is very worried about you. And I'm afraid that if you come in and visit us, he'll fear that, that you're being captured against your will or something. And, I think you should go and be with your friend. And he held up his hand, and then Myron held up his hand. The door closed, the thing started spinning, and he walked back to his friend Duncan and told him the whole story. And what's another charming aspect about this is so many times people in these kind of events, two people witness something, and then it seems to split them. It seems to divide them somehow. There's something where, it ends a friendship, or
yes.
It was the opposite for them. He said they were like old war mates that, they would get together now and then when they were out of earshot of everyone and have a whiskey and go over everything that they experienced that day in great detail. And Duncan has since passed on, which is a shame, because that would have been nice to have added his input.
That's very interesting.
He said that they watched these things from the hedgerow for about 10 minutes. They lifted up all in unison and flew off.
I have read that story, but it's interesting, with the experiences that people have had and that you have lovingly included in your new book. And I think that's an endearment to those as well. And I think, the way that we look at the phenomenon, it is multi-complexed, it's multi-dimensional. And I think, as I said before, it operates on a personal level, or integrates on a personal level of the human psyche. So before, we come to the end of the show, I just want to ask you, Terry, where do you feel, or do you see yourself going now with your experiences? I mean, you're obviously still in contact, or they are still in contact with you, excuse the pun, because there is always some form of psychic connection. I believe that, knowingly or unknowingly. But where is this taking you, Terry? Where are you going to take this now?
I don't have the ability to take it into any direction other than to be open and honest and wait and see what happens. But I think Ronnie mentioned that it's not over, that there's more to come. And you may reinforce that idea too. It's true. I think we have much more to see, much more to come. We have exciting times coming. And, I think we as humanity needs to avoid distractions because there are too many distractions, and focus on what's truly important. And, the planet is important. Our relationship between nations is very important. The thought of war is just frightening.
Mm.
Hopefully we can, raise our vibration, our consciousness, something, and get to a better place. And like Betty said, learn to live globally instead of regionally.
Yes, I love that. That's quite aptly put, actually. I just think that's wonderful. And I just think your books are beautiful, Terry. I really do. And the first one absolutely scared the woolies out of me, I have to say. This one it's beautifully done. I am not surprised they're bestsellers. You're an honest, kind-hearted man. You're a gentleman who will not sit still if something out of place happens. You're like Sherlock Holmes. You'll get your magnifying glass out later on and you'll say, well, we're going to look at this. And I admire you for that. You've come out and it's amazing how much support you have had. I'm so pleased that it's more openly discussed because, as you know, in the 70s and 80s, I know it's taboo now, but it was more taboo then, yes. I mean, even mediums, talking about psychic mediums, you just couldn't really do it without tongue-in-cheek or someone laughing behind your back. But I think things are changing, and I think as we become more educated to this phenomena, as with pioneers like yourself as well, bringing it to the foreground, I think it's going to help a lot of people. It will give them the confidence they need to come out, as you have demonstrated with the Reckoning, in actually come to terms with their own experiences and being brave enough to actually speak about them.
Yes, if that's the only thing I accomplish, I'm very pleased with that. That would be satisfying in itself.
Well, Terry, you are an ambassador. It's amazing because, going through your first book, Instant at Devil's Den, and then your new book, Devil's Den, The Reckoning, it's only wonder that people, reach out to you because you're so honest, so truthful. You're a very, very down-to-earth guy. You're very friendly with everyone, and you're like, a lot of other people. They just want the truth. So, do you have any last words that you want to, say to your listeners before the end of this show, Terry?
Yes, I would. and it would be to continue with what you're doing. If you're hearing my words, that means that you have an interest and that you've tuned into Twin Souls to hear a message and share it and think about it and keep doing that. Keep doing what you're doing. Let's stay on the path.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And well, I've just got to say, Terry, from Ronnie and me, it's been such a delight and honor having you back on our show. And on the very day that your book, your new book, Devil's Den, The Reckoning, is a bestseller. So we say to all of our listeners, you will not be disappointed by both the books because they are an important record of events. And Terry Lovelace is such a sweet, nice guy, very honest bloke, and you will not be disappointed. In fact, this will open your eyes to a lot of things that have been going on that most people won't really talk about. So the new book, Devil's Den, The Reckoning, go out and buy it. It's on Amazon, and thank you very much, Terry, for coming on board. It's been a real honor. And it's like old friends just having a cup of coffee, and having a little chat. And I think what we're doing is wonderful.
It is wonderful. And I thank you both so much. It's always a pleasure. It's a privilege to talk to you. Thank you very much for the invitation. And I wish you both well.
Thank you. And that I just say to our listeners that you've been listening to Terry Lovelace, author of Instance of Devil's Den and Devil's Den, The Reckoning. And, be safe, watch the skies. You've been listening to Twin Souls, your hosts, Ronald and Philip Kinsella, and stay safe.